I'm a regular guy. I'm Bob, and I'm a truck driver. More like a dump truck, I suppose. I drive all kinds of trucks, but dump trucks mostly. I'm fine with that. But it's not flashy. I make good money, but you can't Instagram a way to haul crushed rock or sand out to a construction site. Hey, before I go any further, the folks at We Are the Music Makers asked me to do this video. I've been thinking about how my story happened, and when they told me I could tell my story, it just felt right, so help them out by giving them a like and subscribe. If you like my story, supporting them will make more stories like mine get heard. Anyway, after my 35th birthday, I found myself going around to property management offices as an account holder as well as a machine operator. The general manager told me that he thought I could sit down and go over plans with their managers. I had a plain-spoken honesty, so if I said the planned amount of infill wasn't enough, he eventually stopped going to check. If I said that we didn't need that much rock, he simply removed the amount from the invoice. I was to discuss where things were about halfway into the project, explain what necessary and what didn't make sense, and get the general manager to sign for the corrected plan. Whether it was less for the company or more, I made an extra $1,000. That was about every 2 weeks. Since I was usually the lead among the truck crew, that was a few hundred also. As my income went up, I became increasingly frustrated that I was still on my own. One day I arrived for a meeting but found that the property manager was late. I could leave the crews to handle the dirty work, and since I wasn't wearing heavy-duty clothes but a blue shirt and khakis like my general manager had said, I stayed in the office. A half hour passed, then an hour. The receptionist was actually gathering her things as if she were done for the day, but then she looked at me. I had my Tissot watch on, one that I wore when I walked into an office and then put into a bag when I was out on a site. I was wearing a pair of Brooks Brothers pants that I had found at a thrift store and a Joseph A. Bank dress shirt that I caught for cheap on a clearance rack. I looked pretty good, but generally no one noticed. But suddenly the receptionist asked me if I was all right. She sat in a chair next to me and we just started chatting. Her name was Gina, and she told me she thought I looked great. I blushed. This was the first time a woman ever noticed anything I wore, but I thanked her. I could see that fascinated smile on her face. Gina turned out to be 31. She had been married, but there was a divorce a few years before. I had been selfish over money, foolish, I guess, she admitted. I nodded. Well, it sounds like you've learned a little bit about yourself. She looked down. Yes. Then she looked up at me. But what do you do? I seem to be the jack of all trades. I smiled. Crew leader, machinery driver, account holder, whatever that means. Whenever something needs to be done, the GM looks at me and just says, get her done. I dropped into the gravelly southern accent that sounds like my boss, and that he always laughed at appreciatively. Now, Bobby, y'all need to tell them their folk at General Property Management that they need to sign their new contract. She giggled and touched my hand. You're funny, Bob. I like that. Marco, she sighed. He's my ex-husband. He never joked, never teased me. And then when I got worse with our finances, well, he was never fun again. She looked down. I guess that was my fault. I was seeing a yellow flag. That was twice that she admitted to making poor decisions about money, but it wasn't red. She was the kind of woman who needed structure, boundaries. I was making more money than at any time in my life, and the odds were that it was going to get better. Well, Gina, I can appreciate a woman who can look back on her errors, I paused. Maybe it would be good that if you were in a relationship, you had practical limits that you'd agree to so that you don't wreck finances in the future. For a moment, she looked up at me, and there was a hardness about her face, resentment. But then she looked down, nodded. Yeah, she admitted. Yeah, that sounds about right. Practical limits. She let out a pert little laugh. If I had stayed within those lines, didn't spend every dollar we had twice over, Marco probably wouldn't have sent me away. She let out a defeated sigh. I sat for a minute, but then I decided to see if she was open to enjoying a man who was moderately generous. You know, I've been craving a steak in a relaxed environment. How would you feel about going to Outback? We could get a blooming onion and enjoy some steaks and a few laughs together. Again, there was that displeased look, like there was something about my offer that she resented, but then she shook her head, took a deep breath, and said softly, that would be great, Bob. I haven't been on many dates recently. Having a steak would be a wonderful treat. We traded phone numbers and agreed to go out Friday evening after she got off work. But when she got up, I watched her. I wanted to see what she looked like when she thought I wasn't looking. I turned slightly away, but made sure that my eyes could see through the glass front door. When she stepped through, there was this look of happiness and relief. I interpreted that positively. On Thursday evening, Gina texted me, asking if I would pick her up at her apartment. Of course, I was willing. The next day, I went to the car wash and got my Ford F-150 slicked up and vacuumed. It was older, but it was paid off. I was proud of that. When I got to her apartment complex, it was run down, rough part of town. She was watching out the window, but when I got out of my truck, there was a smile and I could see her standing up. She must have heard me coming because she had opened the door even before I knocked. She had a simple skirt and top. It was one of those outfits that was trying hard to look expensive, but she had a smile on her face. Her eyes crinkled, and when I asked how she was, she said she was glad to see me. When she climbed into my truck, she ran her hand on the slightly worn center console. "Reliable old truck?" she asked. I nodded. "And it's paid off. I'm socking away money in case I need a down payment on the next one." She nodded carefully. I couldn't tell exactly, but I think there was equal parts concern and respect. As we were driving to the Outback, she was asking questions. What did I do for fun? Had I done any traveling? Did I have any hobbies? I shrugged. I hadn't traveled much since I had been single all my life, but I wouldn't mind quiet beach trips. The Outer Banks, Virginia Beach, maybe Myrtle Beach. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught that moment of disgust, but this time there was a look that I found harder to interpret. Guilt? Regret? Then she spoke quietly. "I haven't been able to travel at all since the honeymoon with my ex," she sighed. "We probably would have done a little more, at least had I not spent every penny we had, or didn't have." There was a long pause. I was focusing on a frustrating intersection, but she was looking at me. "How do you feel about maybe the Smokies?" My eyes widened. It was a request to travel, but it was the muted, quiet kind of travel, a simple getaway to the mountains. I smiled and just said, "Maybe," but I knew my voice said it in a way that said I liked the idea. She smiled bigger than I had ever seen, but she wisely let the subject drop. This was still our first date. We arrived at the restaurant, were quickly seated, and we ordered drinks, me a beer, and she got a glass of wine. "Can I also get a glass of water?" she asked. I said I'd have one too. When our drinks came, I noticed that she let the wine glass sit and focused on her glass of water. When the blooming onion came, she attacked it with gusto. "I forgot how much I love these, Bob." She looked around. "This is better than I remembered," she added. "Marcos sometimes suggested that we'd go to Olive Garden, or Chili's, or even Longhorn, and I just turned my nose up at the idea of going to a chain." She shook her head. "Now I wish I had appreciated how good it is." When the time came to order our meals, she squealed at the New York strip. It wasn't the most expensive meal, but it was close. But she had barely sipped her wine and had allowed her water glass to be refilled. Whether she had decided to focus on the meal or maybe she was trying to show joy in moderating the cost, I smiled and just paid attention and didn't let her know that I was treating her actions like data points. I was just pleased she wasn't blowing up the balance for its own sake. I enjoyed my ribeye and listened more than I talked. When we were done, she hadn't even finished her steak or potato, so when the waitress suggested dessert, she shook her head. "I'm full. This was bigger than I expected. I just asked for the check and paid for everything." When we got back in the truck, I could feel her eyes on me. "You know, Bob, maybe this presumptuous, but I really don't want to go back to my dingy old apartment." I steeled myself for her to ask to go out to some nightclub or expensive place downtown. But she surprised me. "There's an old scenic overlook. When I was in high school, we all called it Lover's Leap. There were rumors that dozens of people had jumped from it after being dumped." She grinned. "Are you suggesting that I pine for you tonight and take the plunge?" I asked. She stared at me for about 10 seconds, clearly taken aback. But then she laughed. "No, Bob, nothing like that. But it would be nice to look out over the town." She looked down at the dashboard. "I haven't had many dates." There was a long pause. I kind of shot up my reputation. I started my truck, then looked over at her. Well, Gina, I'm not a man who focuses on the past. If you're a good woman, then I guess I ought to let that stand for itself. Is it that overlook off of David Ridge Road? She looked up at me, her regret opening up into a smile. Yes, that's the one. How long has it been since I've been there? She thought. I think she must have figured it out, but she only said, too long. When we reached the overlook, she climbed out from the truck. I followed, a little surprised. Soon she stepped out onto the broad stone slab that hung out over the side of the cliff. By the time she reached the railing that separated the open area from the open air, I had reached her. We both looked out over the city beneath us. I always imagined there was something magical down at the bottom of this cliff, she said. No one I knew had ever been at the bottom, and I thought that meant there was something amazing down there, she sighed. Maybe it was a treasure, or maybe it was a magic fountain that gave wishes. She looked down. When I was in high school, there wasn't this barrier. We all loved to see how close we could get. One time I even let myself sit right on the edge, letting my legs dangle. But some grown-ups yelled at us, demanding that we get back. She shook her head. I'm probably older now than the people who yelled at me, but I'd still love to look over the edge. One more time, I thought about it. It seemed utterly foolish, but perhaps I could be her protector in that moment, I thought, and came up with an idea. Well, if you're willing to risk it, you climb through, and when you're on the other side of the railing, I'll put my arms around your waist. Then you can bend over the edge and stare down at the bottom without much risk. She started laughing. But then she looked at me. Wait, you're serious? You'd do that? I shrugged. Why not? Just hold my hand while you climb through, and then I'll hold on while you're looking downward. You don't even have to let go of my wrist. She looked out over the city. Then she turned back to me. Okay, if you're sure, I nodded. She took hold of my wrist as she worked her way in between the barriers. Then when she was standing on the other side, she pulled my wrist around her waist. I brought my other arm around her and locked my hands. Then she slowly, carefully bent over, looking down at the bottom. Then she pulled out her phone and started taking pictures. This is wonderful, she whispered. But a moment later, she let out a swear. I saw her phone bounce out of her hands and slide down her blouse. It hit the stone, but thankfully didn't fall over the edge. She began trying to pry my hands apart, but I pulled harder. No, you're not reaching down for that. What? She turned back at me, and there was this moment of rage in her eyes. But then her foot slipped, and I know she would have fallen. Maybe not over the edge, but at least close. My hands were still tightly holding on, and I was able to keep her upright. The rage turned to fear, and then concern, and when she had her footing again, gratitude. I pulled on her, pressing her back against the railing. Get back over here. I will get your phone. She carefully climbed back onto the safe side, and I gently pulled her to a bench a few feet away. Then I went back, got on my stomach, and reached under the railing to the edge. I was able to get her phone, pulled it back, and then stood back up and brought it to her. She stared at me in stunned silence. You were protecting me, and I nearly killed myself by demanding to do things my way. She stared at me, stunned, then broke into tears. She put her arms around me, crying onto my shirt. After the first wave, all she could say was, hold me. So I turned and put my arms around her. There was nothing more to do. As the weeks went by, we kept seeing each other. We hadn't declared anything, but from our second date onward, she treated me like I was the center of her world. For a month, everything was easy. I'd suggest a restaurant, an activity, or a day trip, and Gina never even hesitated. For the first time in my life, it felt like someone wanted me, and that felt great. But then the bomb went off. Gina's hours were being cut. From the 35 hours for full-time down to 20 in 2 weeks' time. She told me about it, but she seemed hopeful she could get a different part-time job, or maybe a replacement. A week passed, then two, and then her savings began to be depleted. A week afterward, she called me and asked me to come to her little apartment. I did, and she welcomed me with a beer and a smile that was very forced. We sat down on the couch. Bob, I hate to presume upon you. I haven't wanted to bring money into this relationship, but I'm not going to make it. My cell phone, electricity, rent, even the very basics. I've written everything down, and I'm not going to be able to cover my expenses. She looked at me sadly and handed me the sheet she had written up, showing her expenses versus her reduced income. I thought for a minute. Now wasn't the time for a lecture. Now wasn't the time for a discussion about saving. This was a woman who was living the bare minimum, and she wasn't making it. I took a deep breath, quiet, serious. Resolutely, I asked, what would it take to be able to survive, to keep body and soul together? She took a deep breath. 300 a month, she had said it. She was asking, she had admitted her past, but she was barely holding on. She wasn't going to make it, not at 20 hours a week. She came to me not for money to live her best life. She was asking me to help her survive. 100 a week, I said. That's for bills, groceries, and gas. I paused. It'll be cutting into my own savings a bit, but if you keep it limited to what you need to make it, then I'll help you. She was silent for a minute. I could see her processing my offer. Then, without warning, she threw her arms around me as if I had pulled her from a raging sea and onto dry land. Once again, she was bawling into my shoulder. I gently put my arms around her, and in between sobs I could hear her say, I love you, thank you. Over the next several weeks, she lived necessary dependence on me. Not only was I sending her money to cover her bills, but she was also coming over for dinner, the second time she offered to cook. I dug a house key out of a drawer so she could let herself in. The smile on her face when she picked it up was the best feeling I had had in a long time. Soon she was cooking dinner. Every day she was working less than 5 hours. It felt like we weren't just a couple, but that we really had something. After a month, she was able to land another job. It was as an assistant office manager with a facilities company. It paid better than her original job. But she told me that she wouldn't get her first paycheck for 2 weeks. After that, she asked if she could keep it up so she could buy a couple suits to help with her work. I said nothing and continued sending her the money. But when I asked her out, she seemed too distracted, too busy to see me. But then a week after that, even though I hadn't seen her in two, she called me. Bob, I know you've helped me so much, but do you think you can help me with just a little more this week? I've been getting accessories and makeup in order to look good in my new job. I stayed silent for a long time on the phone. I'll send you an extra 50, but this is going to be the last week you get the free ride. Upon hearing that, she exploded. She called me controlling. She called me toxic. She said after all she did for me, how could I cut her off like this? After she badgered and browbeat me for 15 minutes, I could hear her panting, still in a rage. All I said was, all right, Gina, I'm sorry that's what you think. Goodbye. And then I hung up. In a matter of 3 weeks, she had gone from joyfully cooking and cleaning in my apartment to avoiding me and demanding more and more, even though she objectively no longer needed the help. I sighed. I was 37, turning 38 next month. I turned to my computer. I had been preparing a trip to Gatlinburg together. I was going to tell her about it on my birthday. For a solid week, I heard nothing from her. But then there were little texts. Hey, or how are you doing? I ignored them. I was too wounded, too hurt. I had officially given up. I looked at my life, chalked it up as a loss, and dove back entirely into my work. Maybe once a week, I'd get a text from her, just something asking how I was doing. But I wasn't interested in being buddies or just hanging out with her. But one day, after working for 12 hours, doing everything, driving the truck, negotiating with property managers, and putting out fires on job sites, I opened the door, and there was Gina cooking in my apartment. She must have still had the house key, and she risked coming in without permission to force my attention. I stared at her blankly. I almost told her to leave and not come back, but I was so tired. I fell onto the couch saying nothing. The first thing she did was to hand me a beer. I looked at it, and I was almost too tired to drink it. I was certainly too tired to appreciate the gesture of her handing me one of my own beers. But then she handed me an envelope. In it was money. On the envelope it read $750 paid back, in full, to the man I love. That forced my attention. I had accounted that money as gone. I always had. I never once thought to ask for it back, but when she broke my heart, I had tried to forget about it entirely. Please, Bob, listen to me. It was a strain to even look up at her. I hurt you. I know I did. I've been losing sleep every day. I even went back to the minimalist diet so I could save up the money and give it back to you. I kept trying to text you because I wanted you to see that I was stupid to make it about the money and not about the man who was sharing it with me. She grabbed my hand, pulled it to her cheek. Please, Bob, I struggled every day because every moment we were together, I had to fight to kill that voice that said, I don't need you. I can handle myself. That's when I realized all those little times her face darkened or I did something that was inconvenient. It wasn't my imagination. It was a struggle in her mind. She had to fight to accept all my good for her. She had slipped up when I told her I was cutting her off. But she realized the mistake was so dire that she was losing me. She went back to struggling just so she could pay me back the money I never expected to see. Bob, please believe me. I never tried this hard for Marco. I never gave myself over to anything like this before. If you need to see me struggle more, I'll do it. Just tell me you'll forgive me. I was still so tired. It would have been so easy to say no that it was too late. But the money in my hand couldn't be ignored. She didn't just come to beg for forgiveness. She actually sacrificed to pay me back. She went further than I would have asked. She squeezed and suffered in order to bring this to me. I held an arm open to her, encouraging her to join me on the couch. Wide-eyed, surprised, but unwilling to hesitate, she collapsed onto the couch, resting her head on shoulder and cuddling into me like she never had before. I quietly said, "We'll use the money for a nice little weekend in the Smokies." She looked up at me, smiled, and gently kissed me. It was then I knew that we were going to make it. A few minutes later, she brought us plates of food, and never had anything ever tasted so good. For the first time I could remember, I was happy.